All right, tonight we have the privilege of having Jason Grillo as our speaker. He's the Director of Partnerships and Operations for a cool name called AirMiners, capital A, capital M, all one word, AirMiners, a worldwide community of innovators dedicated to advancing the practice of removing carbon dioxide and its equivalent greenhouse gases from the atmosphere across all methods. His experience in AirMiners spans leading the biweekly virtual event series, managing the community for over 2,000 people, and co-leading the Launchpad Accelerator program for early stage startups. So he encourages you to reach out to him to help start up removing atmospheric greenhouse gases. And I can put his email address in chat. Jason@airminers.org. And also we are proud to say that he is a former Sustainable Sharon Coalition communications leader. And so we miss him and Sharon, and so glad that you thought of us to reach out and share your important work. Jason, take it away.
Proud to have been a former, to have been a communications leader for Sustainable Sharon. And, I think of you all, even though I live in Washington State now, think of you all frequently. So thanks, everyone. Cheryl, I'd like to be able to share my...
Oh, yes. Now you can.
Awesome. Thank you. Okay. There we go. And awesome. So, hey, everyone. Good to see you and good to see some familiar faces. I'm Jason Grillo and I work with AirMiners. And as Cheryl mentioned, it's a real pleasure and a privilege for me to be here with you today to kind of close the loop on, hey, what happened to that Jason guy after he moved from Sharon in like mid 2020, just as the pandemic was starting? And whatever became of him. So here I am, like I said, closing loop. So what do we do in AirMiners, you might be asking? So in a sense, why are we having this meeting? Why am I presenting to you today? Why are we here? Not to get epistemological, but what's the purpose of having? Basically, we need to remove carbon from the atmosphere. That's the focus of the work that I do with the organization called AirMiners. And this illustrates, a couple of the pathways that we seem to be on as a world civilization. One is a business as usual path in terms of annual CO2 emissions. Another path is from decarbonization only, which we need to do. 100%. We need electric vehicles yesterday, or really 20 years ago. Same with carbon-free energy sources. We need those as soon as possible. That said, even if emissions were to stop 100% tomorrow, there would still be 1 trillion tons of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, which according to NASA is going to be still around in 200 or 300 years time. So we need to clean that big carbon spill in the sky that we've created, as a society have created over the last 2 centuries. And what the new field of carbon dioxide removal or greenhouse gas removal does is to make that come to pass. The IPCC report indicates in order to get on a 1.5 degree warming pathway, we actually need this because there are a certain amount of emissions that are not going to be very easy to decarbonize. That's why we need to become ultimately a carbon negative society by 2050. And that informs what we do in AirMiners. So what is carbon dioxide removal? Activities that remove CO2 from the atmosphere and durably store it for thousands of, and durably store it for thousands of years in ocean reservoirs or in products. So that could take any one of a number of different forms. Just to kind of level set first on what carbon removal is. Then I'll dive into what AirMiners is and how we fit into here. So the practice of carbon removal could be direct air capture. This is a plant by a facility by a company called Climeworks in Switzerland. It could be ocean systems such as seaweed harvesting or electrochemical processes to run electric current through seawater called direct ocean capture to remove CO2 from the oceans. It could be mineralization, fusing the CO2 with rock, such as basalt rock or olivine rock. This is an example of that you see here illustrated. And finally, land-based. That could be regenerative agricultural practices, getting carbon dioxide stored in the soil, or a substance called biochar, which is basically pyrolyzed, in other words, ultra-heated agricultural biomass, waste biomass, that retains carbon dioxide for centuries and serves as a carbon sink, as well as forest, to afforest or to reforest land that would not otherwise have been covered by forests. So those are some of the primary pathways. There's always new different ways that people are thinking of removing carbon from the atmosphere to date. To be honest, I am not a technical expert, but I'm happy to answer any questions on this. And feel free to ask any questions along the way if people want to raise their hands. So CO2 utilization is a key role here. This is an example of some products that can be made out of CO2 from some concept products that were made, such as sandals, yoga mats, toothpaste, concrete, and cement are also used frequently to contain CO2, which will retain it for a very long time, centuries even. You can even make vodka out of CO2. This is an example of a project that's ongoing right now called the Orca plant in Iceland, undertaken by the company I talked to you about earlier, Climeworks. This is a Swiss direct air capture company. You can see the direct air capture contactors there. The idea is the air runs off of these fans where air flows over a contactor and filters out the CO2 from the air. Those pipes that you see there take the CO2 that's been removed from the ambient air and shunt it into basalt rock that combines with the CO2 chemically to store it for centuries. Additionally, this is all on top of a geothermal plant in Iceland, which offers carbon-free energy to it. And that launched about 1.5 years ago, and a capacity of about 4,000 tons of CO2 per year. Pilot plant, understood that's not a very large capacity, but with more deployments happening by Climeworks and others, this is a technology to look out for. Amazon, their HQ2 does have concrete that contains CO2 in it. This is done by a company called Carbon Cure out of Halifax, Nova Scotia, Canada. And that's an example of, again, carbon negative concrete. There's a biochar pilot example of what biochar is. I mentioned it earlier. A company called Carboculture in California, and also has headquarters in Finland, locks up the CO2 in a process that will retain the excess CO2 in the from the biomass in the char that gets performed. Also makes a fantastic soil amendment, so that farmers can use it to improve crop yields and also reduce irrigation dependency. AirMiners' mission, just to get back, to it, we want to remove 1 billion tons of CO2 and its equivalent from the atmosphere by the end of the century. And I say CO2 equivalent because yes, CO2 is important. Also, we have methane and nitrous oxide as gases that are critically warming our atmosphere that we want to keep tabs on and remove from the atmosphere. Our primary activities kind of flow from that. We've got our boot up for people who want to go from 0 to 1 on carbon removal. We've got a community of, as Chair mentioned, over 2,000 people worldwide, punctuated by events that we host every so often, and our Launchpad program, which I'll talk to you a little bit more about in a second. Boot Up is for people, again, who are new to carbon removal. It's a 5-week free program. It doesn't cost anything. Did I mention it's free? Free. And for anyone to join and learn about state-of-the-art carbon removal practices with educational content that that the AirMiners team provides to the participants with 2 group meetings per week. People all over the world can participate from the convenience of your own home. It's all done over Zoom. You don't have to fly anywhere. And you'll be matched up with 5 or 6 other people who are eager to learn about carbon removal from the ground up. Our community, as mentioned, has quite a few people worldwide. That's been in place, that's experienced significant growth over the last 3 years since I've been involved with AirMiners, from 400 to where we are now, over 2,000 people. Events, as I mentioned, punctuate some of the topics that we want to bring forward in the community. We exist to accelerate the pace of innovation in removing greenhouse gas from the atmosphere. It's a how-to for CDR methods, including how to do what's called MRV, measurement, reporting, and verification, to make sure that the carbon is being removed and it is being stored. Talking about carbon markets as well, policy, financing issues, as well as technical approaches to carbon removal. And finally, the Launchpad program. I mentioned this earlier. This is a 6-week program. We run it every quarter for startups who are at the very early stages. We're talking maybe 2 or 3 or 4 people on a team who we will run through a 6-week program to train them up on things like techno-economic assessment, or how to pitch to investors, how to find financing, and how to operate with carbon credits for their startup that we help to achieve traction on their way to getting funding. To date, we've graduated about 100 teams over the course of the 2 years of running the Launchpad program, and the teams who have graduated have raised about $37 million collectively over the course of that time. And that's about it for my presentation. If you're interested in learning more, I'm all ears. So just feel free to email me at jason@airminers.org. I have some links here for the main AirMiners website, as well as the Launchpad. If you know of any early stage startups who are removing carbon from the atmosphere, our Boot Up if you want to join that, and our event series. We are hosting actually our first methane focused event in a couple of weeks. So look to that link if you want to join that. And then our YouTube channel, which has a complete archive of all of our content from our events over the last 3 years. So with that, I just want to say once again, thank you very much. It's been a privilege, and happy to cede the floor back to Cheryl. Happy to answer any questions, though.
Great. Thank you, Jason.
Yeah.
Zoom round of applause. Questions? Ralph has a question.
Wow, lots of questions. Go for it.
Ralph, you're muted.
Sorry about that. Okay. Yeah. So thanks. We need every hand on deck with this problem, and what you guys are doing is on the right side. First, I'll say that 60 Minutes on this past Sunday night, 3 nights ago, one of their 3 stories was about this very thing. Good examples of the technology, and you can probably find it on YouTube or on demand or wherever it's worth watching. But they got into the issue of who's doing it, and their story includes Climb, the one you mentioned, the Swiss company, I believe. Yeah, Climeworks. But they also showed a oil company in America that they're retrieving and pulling out carbon that they're then using to be more efficient at drilling oil. And they're claiming that, well, net, we're releasing less carbon dioxide than we would be the way we're doing things now. Right. And I don't know. So do you have limits on who you'll work with, and how, if Shell came to you and said, hey, we want to get into this business, would you do that? And how do you handle that?
Sure. Good question. So we tend to not work with companies that intend to go into enhanced oil recovery, which is what you're talking about. Basically, okay. You can pump CO2 back into the ground, and it makes it easier to get more oil to bubble up. So I'm happy to say the federal government actually agrees with us in that respect. So in the IRA, there's a tax credit called the 45Q tax credit that enables carbon removal companies who do not use it for anything to get $180 per ton of CO2 removed from the atmosphere. Yes, there are incentives for utilizing CO2, including enhanced oil recovery, but those incentives are lower than what it would mean for a company to just take CO2 from the atmosphere and put it underground in a form that never, ever gets used for anything. Also, to be clear, there are many different ways of removing carbon from the atmosphere, and direct air capture is just one of them. To date, I'll say that in our Launchpad company, we have not worked with any companies that intend to work with, who intend to go into enhanced oil recovery.
Paul, you're muted.
Gonna say Rory had his hand up before me. I'll defer to
Oh,
him.
I didn't see it. Is it a physical hand or a virtual hand?
Physical.
Sorry, Rory. I have to scroll through everyone. Okay, Rory's next. But Paul?
Okay, after Paul, go ahead.
Yeah, Paul, then Rory. Yeah,
Oh,
go ahead, Paul.
okay. Yeah, hi, Jason. Thank you very much for your
Paul.
excellent presentation. I noticed the picture on your wall of the Earth. Yeah,
Yes.
which I think was taken from one of the moonshots, and it reminded me of Apollo 13, which is an excellent metaphor, I think, for what you're doing, where you know, they had to patch together a carbon dioxide removal system from the space capsule,
Yes.
and they succeeded in bringing the astronauts back alive, just barely, by the skin of their teeth. But it's an excellent movie with Tom Hanks. You ought to watch it, and then think about what the comparison between that space capsule hurtling through space and our planet Earth hurtling through space, both of which are in jeopardy of a carbon dioxide mass extinction, basically. So think about it. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Paul.
So Jason, the challenge, I guess there are two parts. One is the actual capture of CO2. The second is where do you put it? How do you sequester it? And the thing that I guess is really daunting is the scale up of each process. You know, can it be scaled in a reasonable way? And my question is this: is it conceivable that carbon or CO2 removal could be done at a local level so that it could really become a cottage industry as opposed to something that has to be scaled up big time?
Yes, the answer is absolutely yes. That there are ways. Look, I showed you the pictures of a huge centralized direct air capture facility, right? I will tell you that I've worked myself, and others on the AirMiners team have worked with companies that want to do so at a smaller, want to do similar direct air capture to smaller scale elsewhere. For other methods of carbon removal, I mentioned biochar. People have been doing biochar as a as an artisanal project at a small scale for centuries. And that is something that is intense, can be very localized for that kind of activity. Does not take, all you need is a pyrolyzing machine in really in a backyard. And you could you could take waste biomass, yard waste, and create biochar with that. Again, would make a nice soil amendment. It could also be combined into building materials to make them stronger. There's, so those are some of the, localized ways of doing it. To your point, Roy, it does not have to be a big, huge thing that that only certain people can get involved in. There are ways of localizing it. I also mentioned regenerative agriculture there as well. That's a way that just even smallholder farmers can get involved with to do things like cover cropping and no-till agriculture that can draw carbon out of the atmosphere and store it in the soils. There's also things like enhanced rock weathering, basically grinding up rock. This company out of Ireland I've done some work with. Their business model is to take rejected concrete and grind that can't be used anywhere, grind it up and put it on agricultural fields. So there are ways for people, to your point, of getting involved at a local level that doesn't require like a big, a big company to come in and do something.
Thank you. Any other questions? Paul.
Yeah, sorry, but I have one question, and that is, are there any publicly traded companies involved in carbon removal from the atmosphere so that people could invest in them and use their, financial
Yeah.
resources to boost this industry?
Ah, good question. No, not to my knowledge.
Thank you.
Again, the whole field is extremely new. It's something that it's still in its infancy, and it was even more of it was basically a newborn lo these 3 years ago when I was last attending a in-person, the Sustainable Sharing meetings. But that is but it's a very new field. I do not know of any publicly traded companies. The closest would be, let's see, there's a company in Finland that used to run a marketplace for trading, for exchanging carbon credits. That was that had a acquisition event by the NASDAQ. But I don't know, but they're not public. So.
All right. Thank you. I have a question. Oh, and then Ralph,
Go
and then
ahead,
we'll.
sure.
Okay. So you had said carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases, which I'm really happy to do, another carbon molecule. So chlorofluorocarbons, substitute HCFCs, they're thousands of times more effective being greenhouse gases than CO2. Does this technology work with them too?
That's a good question. I don't know. The focus has been mostly on CO2. HFCs, I mean, yeah, the Kigali Accord is going to do a lot to reduce their emission into the atmosphere, but I looked at the charts. Yes, they're very, very long lived. Nitrous oxide too, actually. So I don't know that they do. If they do, then they're not tracked at this point.
Okay, just curious. Ralph, and then we'll move.
I was just going to say that whenever people talk about this or people talk to us and ask, we have to always say we have to stop adding emissions to the atmosphere. That
Yes.
This is such a small part. It's going to suck up a very small percentage of what's in the atmosphere now and what we continue to emit. I mean, it seems to me, and the analogy I have is that we're sweeping a carpet, but there's a dust storm and the door is open, and we're just adding so much. And I know your industry that's what all the people in your industry say. So we just have to keep that in mind, that it's going to help a lot because it's going to be impossible to shut off all emissions. But we're doing we're so behind in shutting them off. So
I mean, look, 80 to 90% of the work to get to net zero is going to be decarbonization, is going to be stopping emissions.
Right.
That is clear. And everybody who I've encountered in the carbon removal space pretty much says the same. Like we cannot get to net zero in our lifetime without major advances in the deployment and innovation in again, carbon-free energy, fuels, and transportation across all sectors. It just can't happen.
Right. Good.
Thank you. Thanks for pointing that out. Colleen, so I think this is to you, Paul. Colleen put a link in the chat, some companies to allow people to directly contribute. So
Yes.
Thank you for that. And we really appreciate you being here, Jason. So I'm thinking maybe I'll sign up for that free course. That sounds excellent. So it's good work, and we appreciate that you thought of us to come back.
Appreciate you having me.
Excellent.
Yeah, and I'd speak